That was a really good clap. That was amazing.
Trying to be nice to Kevin.
Well, hey guys, welcome to House Parties. We are so stoked that you guys are with us tonight. Want to introduce you to a friend of mine. A lot of you guys know him, but if you don't, this is Chad. Say hey, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
No, I said say hey, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Man, everybody gets that wrong every week. Really bad at following instructions, Chad. Chad, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how long have you been serving in the student ministry off and on?
So this is about my 15th year of actually doing youth ministry.
So you are like literally somebody who's been serving in the student ministry longer than most of these kids have been alive.
I guess so.
That is wild. Well, Chad is amazing. He loves our church. He loves our student ministry. He loves you guys. He is actually hopping back in as one of our leaders for House Party. Kind of took the last year off with COVID because Chad's afraid of COVID. No, I'm kidding. It's not that at all. Chad just has a government job. It's super secret. He tells the weather. And yeah, he just had to be safe. But he's back now. He's in a House Party. He's going to all of our events. It's super cool. And today he's going to be hanging out with us as we have a conversation. But before we get to that, I want to do some slices. So, Chad, what do you have? And this week, we're going to try to make sure that we don't talk about parents wanting to marry their children.
Okay.
Yeah, that was last week. That was a little weird.
I will avoid that. I don't know how you
do. Please do. All right, what do you got?
So I have a sheep. And this is an Australian sheep.
And I'll throw an image up here on the screen.
Yeah, I think we've got before and after pictures for you. But Australia grows a lot of sheep because they have a lot of this kind of almost desert land that is not good enough for cows, but sheep do okay in it.
Okay.
So they grow a lot of wool, and there's a kind of sheep called merino, which is where we get merino wool.
Like Dan Marino, the football player?
Like Dan Marino, only a sheep. And so they're bred to grow this.
What would Dan Marino look like as a sheep? I'm going to see if I can Google it and find an image.
You need to
Anyways, continue. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting your slice.
I gave you some material for photoshopping Dan Marino in there if you want.
I'm not going to Photoshop.
But yeah, so these sheep grow this really fine fabric quickly, but they don't shed it. So they have to be sheared.
Okay.
Like once or twice a year, they have to have all of the wool cut off of them. Well, every few years they find a sheep who's wandering around in the desert in Australia that got away from his flock, and has just been out there, eating grass and wandering around enjoying their freedom, right? Except it doesn't go so well because they don't shed.
Okay.
And they grow wool really quickly. So in February in the state of Victoria out in the outback, they found this sheep wandering around and been out there for a few years. His name is Barak. And so he'd been out there for several years.
Such a dad.
So he's got all this wool on there, and he's almost dead because he's carrying around all this wool in the Australian heat. Like, it's 110 degrees there in the summer.
Yeah, and that wool probably weighs a good amount.
They got 78 pounds of wool off of this guy. Now,
Dude, I bet that sheep was yoked.
The sheep himself weighs about 40 pounds. He's like a kind of a medium-sized dog, right? And he's got 80 pounds of wool on him in the Australian heat.
Dude, his
it's
legs
grown
must
over
have
his
been
face,
jacked.
so he can't even see anymore. So he's like smelling around trying to find grass and eating it. So then anyway, they took Brock in and took care of him. They got him shaved. We got some before and after pictures for you, and Brock is doing fine now.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Barak. Did they name him?
Barak.
Australians are weird, y'all. They're weird. All right, so for me, I've got a different slice. I don't go foreign for mine. I go here in America because everything is better in America. That's actually not true. But it's kind of a biblical story and totally kind of not at all. So there was a dude off Cape Cod who was lobster diving the other week. And so he's down there checking his cages. He's down like 40, 50 feet, something like that. He's in scuba gear. And while he's down there checking all of his cages, all of a sudden, everything goes black. And everything gets super, super tight around him. What do you think happened, Chad?
The big lobster came and got him?
The dude got swallowed by a humpback whale.
No way.
Yes, dude. It's like straight out of Jonah or Pinocchio. The dude was in there. The whale was trying to like swallow him and eat him. And he's like, when I was in there, like they don't have teeth, so he started like punching this thing, and then it went up to the surface, obviously realizing that this dude was going to be too big for him to swallow. Began to shake his head and then just threw the guy.
Just spit him out like Jonah.
Yeah, just like Jonah. So if anybody tells you that can't happen, you pull up this news article and you send it to them and you say proof.
That's crazy.
A little bit crazy. I don't know. I thought it was weird.
I don't know. I'd be pretty freaked out.
I would actually be really intrigued about being swallowed by a whale and just what that would be like.
Like, how did he even think to like, oh, I'm in a whale's mouth, I should punch it? Like,
well, I feel like that's a pretty safe move. Like, if I was inside of a whale's mouth, I would be hitting everything. But like, can you imagine like just how dark it was? And it's not like he can smell anything because he's underwater, right? Like, so it's like dark, it's wet, and it's like I don't know. The guy probably thought he was gonna die. Like, what do you think about in that moment? You're like, I am being eaten by a big sea creature, and literally nobody can help me because I'm 40, 50, 70 feet underwater. Yeah.
I think I just shut down. I would just like get swallowed or something.
Yeah. Hey, oh, by the way, your slice made me think of something that I want to share with you guys. I'm going to pop up the images here on the screen, but I spent a lot of time on social media sleuthing the internet, and I saw this this dog groomer who got fired the other day because of some of the things that he did to the animals that came in there. And some of them I can't show because they're inappropriate, but some of them I can. So enjoy these things that are now popping up on the screen and just giggle amongst yourselves. All right, that's enough of that. Hopefully you guys got to laugh at a couple of those. Sorry they were a little bit too quick. That's really the only way to make that all work. Anyways, Chad, you ready?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, first things first, guys, if you have a Bible, go ahead and pull that out. We're going to be in James chapter 2 today. If you guys don't, most of you have one of these things. It's called a cell phone. If you don't have one, go beg your parents for one. Tell them that Stetson told you needed it. But get out the Bible app. If you don't have it, go ahead and download it. It's called YouVersion. Pull up James 2 because like our heart is that as we talk about this stuff, and more importantly as you guys talk about this stuff in your group, is that you guys could look at Scripture. And so just a little kind of setup of where we are, Chad. I know you were around last week, but for everybody else who wasn't here, our hope and our desire this summer is really to help you guys grow in your relationship with Jesus. Like that's it. 2 weeks ago I talked about this idea of how like a lot of us, we want life, right? We want to grow. We want to experience what Jesus has for us. But the problem is like there are these things in our life that kind of keep that from happening. And I use like this whole imagery of a dam, right? Like a beaver dam, they build it, cuts off the stream, everything downstream dies. For many of us, that's kind of how our spiritual lives go. And like we've got like these dams built up with all these different things, whether it's like shame or regret or busyness or guilt. Like, I mean, it could be like anything that somebody wants to list, but we have all of these things keeping us from experiencing the life Jesus wants for us. And our hope is this summer we begin to dismantle the dam, remove or address or deal with some of the things that are maybe keeping us away from God so that we could actually experience that life that we want from him. And so we thought, what better way to do this than just going through the book of James? And instead of doing like a sermon or something like that where I get here and tell you what this whole thing means, I thought it would be cool for us to bring different leaders on each week to sit down, for us to have a conversation about things that stick out to us in this passage and some things of that we just think are significant, so that we could then hand it off to you guys in your house parties to actually go through kind of verse by verse and just say like, God, like, what do you say, right? Not what does Nate say or Chad say or Stetson say or anybody else say, but like, God, like, what does your word say? Make sense?
Yeah.
You guys tracking? Awesome. Cool. Well, we did James 1 last week. Today, we're going to be in James chapter 2. So as you look at this, Chad, like what stands out to you? What jumps out to you that you're like, man, like I think students need to know this?
I mean, there's kind of two parts, and the first one's kind of a specific thing about like treating people fairly.
Yeah, go into that. Talk a little bit more about that. And then it goes into
kind of this broader, like how are you living your life thing. So
let's start with that first part, treating people fairly.
He uses the example of how like a lot of people will treat like rich people or people that have power over them, like they'll do special things for them, and ignore the people that
why don't you just go
can't
and read
get anything from.
Go ahead and read that passage. Yeah.
It says,
verses 2. That'd be helpful.
Yes. So it's first couple verses of James 2. My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? For example, suppose someone comes into your meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry, and another comes in who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, you can stand over there or else sit on the floor, well, doesn't this discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives? Listen to me, brothers and sisters. Hasn't God chosen the poor in this world to be rich in faith? Aren't they the ones who will inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? And so he's talking about, I mean, obviously just the fact that we're treating people based on what they can do for us.
Yeah.
That's the reason we're treating the rich people well is, mostly because, they're somebody and they can do something for us.
Well, yeah, and like I think about like the students who are watching right now, like what James is saying here, I think is so incredibly applicable to you guys, right? Because like we have been trained as people, you guys have been trained like your whole life growing up, to more or less just look out for yourself, right? Like that's what we do, right? Like we got to go get ours, we got to hustle so that we can achieve something, right? Like it is literally all about us, and that's a pretty worldly way of seeing things, of saying people. Like the people around us are only good for what we can get from them. So in essence, like we kind of use people. Like that's what a lot of people do, right? Like, so I'm going to go hang out with that kid because he's popular, or I'm going to go get to know that girl because she has lots of followers on Instagram, and if I get in a picture with her, like, and then she's going to tag me, and then a bunch of new people are going to follow me, right? Like this kind of stuff happens all the time. And the problem with that is, I think James would say is that we're not seeing people as people, right? We're seeing people as like objects or commodities that are to be used and abused for our own selfish gain. Why is that a problem?
Yeah, it's just not the heart of God. It's not the way we're supposed to be looking at people. We're supposed to be looking at people for who they are, not for our intent. We're supposed to get outside of, our relationships are not supposed to be about me.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be about us.
Well, exactly. It's like we have this call as followers of Jesus to begin seeing people the way that Jesus sees them, right? I think about like David in the Old Testament when he was about to be called as the king, right? Like all these people get brought before the prophet, and God's like, hey, one of these brothers is going to be the king, and so you got like Samuel who's looking at all these dudes. He's like, oh, dude, that one's tall and buff. Yeah, like that's got to be the king. Or this one's super handsome. Like he's got to be the king. And like God kind of rebukes Samuel and says like, hey, like I don't look at outward appearances. Like I judge the heart. Right. And I think about that when I read what James is writing here, because I think it's so incredibly applicable, except maybe let's go a little bit even beyond the heart. Like let's talk about this idea of the image, right? Every single man, woman, child, everybody at your school, whether you like them or not, whether they can do anything for you or not, like they are an image bearer. Somebody who has been created and crafted in the image of God, right? You could read all about Psalm 139, the whole I'm fearfully and wonderfully made thing, but like because somebody is made in the image of God, because somebody is somebody that God loves and sent his son to the cross for, like, man, we got to do a better job at how we treat people, at how we love people.
I know we've had some conversations just about like not writing people off and how quick we tend to do that, and we need to get past that and not write people off, even if they come in dirty or in rags, or we don't think, we think, maybe our relationship's going to be all us giving them stuff, and that's how it's going to be. Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's almost as if James is saying, like, you got to approach relationships not thinking about, like, what you can get, but instead about what you can give. Like how can I help this person see Jesus? How could I help this person experience the kingdom? How could I make their life better? How could I bring a smile to their face, right? So we're not using people. We're actually trying to serve people.
What can I give in this situation? And a little secret to that is when we're giving, we're also going to get something out of that too.
Yeah.
Maybe not in a material sense, but that's actually being who we're made to be. So it's not really a loss to be giving.
Yeah. Yeah, one, I think more than anything, we experience the favor and the blessing of God when we do this stuff. And we experience joy, and there's a reason for that, because we're actually living the way that we're supposed to be living, right? Like I think about my car. If I put gasoline in my car, that thing's going to drive really well. Why? Because it was designed for gasoline. But if I put diesel in there, that engine's going to seize up and break, and I'm going to get a really expensive bill from the mechanic. Why? Because my car isn't designed to run off diesel. It needs gasoline. And I think the same kind of thing happens here in the way that we treat and engage with people. Like if we do it the way God's called us to, the way we were designed to, life's just going to run a little bit smoother.
I think it's kind of interesting too, the bit about, hasn't God chosen the poor in this world to be rich in faith? Our stuff gets in the way a lot of times of trusting God.
Yeah.
And in our culture, we're in a pretty good position of strength as far as our place in the world and what we have. And, even the average American, you've got education, you've got, you may not feel rich, but you've got a lot of resources. What's the American dream? You can be You can do whatever you want to do. You
I
can
could have
be whatever
Netflix
you want
and
to be.
Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
American
we can
dream
do great
right there.
things. And if you look at somebody who's poor, if you're somebody who's growing your food for today, and it sure better rain this week, you're trusting God for everything every second.
Yeah.
As soon as we have something that's ours, we're trusting that first, and then we go to God. I mean, how often have you heard somebody say there's nothing left to do but pray?
I like that.
Right? We go to God last. And we need to train ourselves to go to God first, because everything that we have, every skill that we have, every resource that we have is something that God gave to us. It could disappear tomorrow.
Yeah.
It could double tomorrow. That's all up to God.
That's
it's
good,
mostly
man.
because of where and when we were born and what God has given us. So he's pointing out that the poor often set a good example of trusting God where we're not.
Yeah. I love that, man. I love this thing. And there's a section here that you guys will probably talk about in verses 8 to 13. That's pretty cool. But, James says, yes, indeed, it's good for you to obey the royal laws found in the scriptures, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you're actually committing a sin and you are guilty of breaking the whole law. And then he goes on to talk about like all these different things of murder or adultery and these different things. And what James is trying to help them see is like, guys, like we're so prone as people to kind of categorize our sins. And we say like, okay, don't kill. That's like the number one thing I can't do. When you get married, don't commit adultery. And like super low on the list is how we treat people. We're like, well, they're kind of a jerk. They deserve it, right? Like, I'm totally going to, like, subtweet them or do whatever, create a spam account to just tell everybody how terrible they are. Like, and what James wants us to see is that, like, man, in the eyes of God, the way that we treat people, the way that we love people, the way that we care for people, the way that we honor people, like, if we choose not to do that, it is just as bad as all of these other things, right? Because in the eyes of God, there are not degrees of sin. Right? It's not like one sin is worse than another one. It's like, no, like they are all equally offensive. Now, good news, there's grace, right? He loves us. He sent his son Jesus to deal with some of that sin on the cross so that we could experience the newness of life and freedom and all that stuff. But like, we've kind of got to get out of this perspective of thinking like, well, it's not really that big of a deal. Right? It doesn't really matter that I was mean or that I judged them or that I used them. At least I didn't commit adultery or kill them. You know what I mean? And so I'd love for you guys to be able to talk about that in your groups. It's going to be really kind of cool because like for real, like I think about what is in verses 1 to 13 here, and like the application to you guys as middle schoolers and high schoolers is so like significant because, man, like if you guys can treat people and love people the way that Jesus calls you to, like it's going to make such an impact not only in your own heart and life but also in your schools and all of your relationships. So you guys can spend some time talking about that. Let's dive into this second section, Chad. It's verses 14 to 26. What stands out to you here? And I love the title. Like read the heading that's there.
In my Bible it says faith without good deeds is dead.
Mine too. Yeah, faith without good deeds is dead.
I mean, he comes right out and says, you say you have faith. You say you have faith, but
what does that mean? Just
well, that's a good question.
Make it super simple.
That's a good question. What
so you say you have faith.
What does it mean? And I think that's actually one of the main points here is faith is not about facts. It's not like what you know.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like so great example here. Like James is probably writing to a bunch of people who knew all the right stuff. They're like, yeah, I grew up in church. I know all the answers. I know there's 66 books in the Bible. There are 2 testaments. And I know that the answer to most questions my youth pastor asked me is Jesus. I am a Christian.
And you know what, Nate?
Yes.
The demons know all of that too.
I know. That's
like that's not what saves you. You know?
Exactly.
That's not the point of taking all this stuff in your head. What does your heart know? What does your heart do with that?
I love that, right? Like James is essentially calling them to have like this practical application of their faith. It's like, hey, like knowing all that stuff is really great. But if you just know it in your head and it never actually impacts your heart and the way you live, like you have got a problem. He says it's dead.
Yeah, if you're not putting this into action, and I don't know if you know the backstory on where Martin Luther chose to put the Book of James. But
yeah, he wanted to pull it out.
His big thing was the church was telling everybody you got to do this, and this to be saved, and it even went so far as giving stuff to the guy that's making the rules, right? So that was bad. And so he put Romans up in front because Romans is all about, you're saved by grace, not by works.
Yep.
Which is, enormous. But here in James we find a lot of things to do.
Well, so I've always thought of it like a bicycle. So these two ideas of faith and works, right? So faith is what do we believe, works is what do we do. And so there are some people who go like, oh, faith is the thing that saves you. You just got to believe it. You pray, you confess, like you're good to go. You're going to heaven. Go off and do whatever you want to do. Jesus is going to save you. And it's like, well, okay, like that could be true.
Woohoo, I'm free.
Right? It basically becomes this get out of hell free card. But then there's other people who would be like the works people who are like, no. It doesn't matter what I believe. It's just about what I do. But what we find here is that James is going like it's actually both. Yeah. Right? And so the idea of a bicycle pedal, like if you only had one pedal on a bike, you would not be able to get very far. Like just picture how weird that would look. Somebody's just like with one, right? Because you can't propel yourself forward. But with the two pedals, well, shoot, man, like you can ride up a hill with that thing because there's the faith that propels you to trust, and then you do the works, which actually helps you develop more faith. And it's kind of like this cycle. And what James is saying is like, man, like you need both, right? Like he even says here, where does he say? Some may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. And then he says in verse 18, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds, right? So the things we do, it actually proves the things that we say we believe.
I mean, if you're not doing it, you really don't have the faith. Like you don't believe God enough to do what he tells you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, if somebody's your friend and they keep stabbing you in the back, are they really your friend?
Yeah.
I like, he gives the example of Abraham, and I love the wording here. He's talking about how, Abraham was an example of faithfulness, that he believed what God told him to do and went and did it. He moved. At one point, he was called to sacrifice his son, and he was going through it until God stopped.
It was a test, by the way.
Yeah, it was a test.
Hey, at least he wasn't called to marry his son.
You weren't going to go there.
Oh, I went there.
All right. So, but it says, Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. Abraham believed God, not Abraham believed in God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This wasn't, oh, yes, I know that there's a God. I believe these certain things about it. He believed God. He believed that God had his good in mind. He believed that God was good. He believed he could trust what God was telling him. So the good deeds that we do are evidence that we believe God. Not believe in God, but that we believe God. We believe that what God's telling us to do is good.
Well, even beyond believe, like I just think of it in this word, like it's actually just trust.
Trust, right.
Right, like because belief kind of feels like, oh, it's just in my head or whatever, but like trust is like, no, like I trust that when I go fly somewhere and I come back that my wife is going to be there waiting for me. Like I'm not going to order an Uber or a cab or something like that because like I trust that she loves me and she wants to see me and she wants to pick me up and she wants to take me back home, right? Trust is like, honestly, guys, like this probably along with that whole passage about prejudice that came just before this, like this is one of those things that I think you guys have such an opportunity to be able to not only grow in, but to actually like show this world who Jesus is through. Like there are so many opportunities for you to love, live, and serve like Jesus in this world. And we've actually got one coming up with our mission trip here in the city where we're actually going to partner with a bunch of nonprofit organizations all throughout Greeley for like 3 days just to serve them and care for them and to literally do the things that Jesus has called us to do in serving and caring for the least of these.
That's going to be really cool.
It is going to be cool, but like it's taking this faith that we claim to believe and it's actually putting it into action. Or for you guys, maybe it's like when somebody is a total jerk to you, you're not a jerk back to them, but you choose to love them. When somebody steals from you, you don't steal back from them. You actually forgive them. Or when they wound you or hurt you, right? Like that's actually faith with good deeds.
Yeah.
Because there's this thing that you say you believe, that Jesus is Lord, He's Savior, He's doing all this great stuff, but then you actually prove it by allowing that truth to guide the way that you live.
And I want to kind of flip that around a little bit too, because it's like, proving your faith, yes, you are, but how do you get there? Like learning how to trust God is a really big deal. Can I do what God told me to do or not do what God told me not to do? Is it going to be okay?
So
how do we learn that?
Let's go back to the image of bicycle pedals, right? Like there are some times where us doing the good deeds that's actually the thing that's going to help us develop the faith and the trust.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not like, well, I have faith so I can go do this thing. Sometimes it's like, well, like, got to know who you are. I don't know how this thing's going to work out, but I'm going to choose to trust you. So I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to trust that the faith is going to catch up and that you're going to develop me. And that's huge. And like, Chad, like, I know, and I didn't plan to go here, but like, I know you more than anybody have actually had to walk this out in your own story a number of years ago.
So just like, yeah, I mean, I've had the experience of he's referring to losing our first child, and seeing how God was faithful in surviving, helping us to survive that, and he's blessed us with more children and kept our marriage together, and he did a lot of beautiful things in that, I don't know, but I think the only reason I survived that, Nate, is that I already knew God well enough. I was 28 years old, I think. I already knew God well enough to trust him with that and to say, I don't understand what's happening, but I believe you. I trust that your hand is in this and you're going to take care of us, and then it's going to be okay. And this hurts terribly, but we're going to get through it. And I was already at a place where, I hadn't thought through that whole situation, but in my mind, the core question was just, do I trust God or not? Yeah. And I was at a point where I did.
When when you first shared that story with me, I remember we were sitting over at Zoe's, and like, I remember how moved I was and how blown away I was at just the way you handled all of that. Because in my mind, it's like, you knew God, right? You'd been following him for a while, so you had faith. And then this like impossible situation dropped on your lap that nobody knows how to deal with. And yet you told me, you're like, I looked at scripture and like I knew what God would call me to do in this situation. And so I did it, and it didn't all make sense. But as time's gone on, maybe some of that other faith is kind of caught up. And like, you guys don't know this, but like, you actually got to have like a nationwide impact on people because of the way that you handled this, and you got to point people to Jesus because of this thing. And it all started with faith and with good works. And I'm using that word good works kind of loosely here, but like you allowed your faith to shape the way that you responded, which then developed and deepened your faith. It not only did something to you, it also impacted all of the people who were around you. And like, man, like, friends, the stuff that you claim to believe as a follower of Jesus, right? Like, the stuff that the Bible teaches, like, it's got to have an impact on the way we live, right? It's not like just wearing a purple t-shirt where it doesn't really matter. No offense.
It doesn't really matter this year.
It's significant. And yet far too many of us just kind of go through life thinking all we need to do is just believe the right thing. And that's only half the truth.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, I mean, this doesn't happen accidentally.
Yeah.
I mean, there's every little thing that you do to move toward God, to seek him out and to try to understand or to open your heart to God. I mean, there's, the good works is the practice part. And Luther wanted to get away from this idea of, we're sinning and we're working it off, and we're sinning and we're working it off again, and we're earning our salvation. So it's not that. But what you are doing is you're practicing your trust in God.
Yeah.
You're giving God an opportunity to prove himself to you by, trying to do this thing the right way. And look, it turned out okay.
Well,
now we're going to try the next thing.
I think that it's like exercise, right? Like, if I want to get in shape, I got to go to the gym. I got to lift weights. I got to run, right? I got to do, and it may not always be easy. It might hurt sometimes, but at the end of the day, if I stay consistent with that kind of practice and that behavior, it's going to make me stronger and healthier.
And it's kind of a paradox, because to learn how to trust God, you have to trust God.
Yep.
Like, you have to start doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing who God is, and seeing that he will provide for you, and seeing that, he'll make it okay.
Yeah.
He'll work things out. And you kind of have to take that step and say, I'm gonna trust you, God.
Mm-hmm.
And as you start walking down that path, it gets easier, because you do get to know God better and better.
Yeah.
Same thing with all the other ways you get closer to God in prayer and in in worship and just being, we've talked about like practicing His presence. You're seeking to move closer to God. You know Him better. Then it gets easier to trust. It's like trying not to sin. You can't just say I'm gonna try not to sin. But as you start practicing things that are righteous living, it gets to be more of a habit. It's hard to give the first $10 to the church. If you've been giving money to the church for years,
it's easy.
It's easy. It's something you do. It's the way you live.
And so for you guys, like, it'd be really cool in your groups to talk about, like, hey, what's that next step that we could take in trust and obedience, and like, where in your life do you need to grow in this? So I think we've probably given them enough to be able to talk through.
I want to say one more thing too.
Okay.
Like, this isn't hard. Like, when you get there, it's not hard anymore.
Okay.
This is a beautiful life that you're being called into. Like, these are beautiful things to do. James is a book of what it looks like to live a beautiful life. And there's joy in it.
There is joy in it.
So there's hard parts getting there, like to start doing things that aren't the natural thing to do might be hard to start with.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful life that you're being called to, and you should pursue it.
Yeah. Well, that was good. I'm glad you interrupted me for that. That was actually worth it. So, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hand it off to you guys in house parties. Your leaders are going to walk you guys through a discussion. Again, you got your Bibles out. The hope is that you just kind of walk through James 2 and say, okay, what stands out to me? What's challenging to me? And get personal, right? Like apply this stuff to your life, right? Like, the goal is not for you to be able to regurgitate the right answer and to say, well, verse 19 says that, like, look, we don't care about that. What we want to know is, how does this actually impact you and the decisions that you're going to make when you walk out of your house party tonight? So house party leaders, we're going to hand it off. Hope you guys have a great discussion. Bye.